So I just realized that I have been filming this and not actually recording. I never hit record, so what a great start. Hey everyone, it's Haley, and today I'm going to be doing kind of a little bit of a different video for you guys. When I asked you guys what kinds of videos you wanted to see, a couple of you guys suggested that I do kind of like a top books from each genre type of thing. So what I'm doing is I have 7 genres and I'm going to be telling you guys my top 2 books from each of those genres. So these genres are in no particular order, just kind of whatever order I'm saying them, and the books within the genres aren't in any particular order either. So the first genre I wanted to talk about is contemporary, so realistic fiction, all those relatable stories. Contemporary is one of my favorite genres. I really enjoy it, and one of my absolute all-time favorite books is in this genre, and that is The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. If you've been watching my videos for a while now, then you know I absolutely adore this book, and one of the saddest things in my life is that I don't own a signed copy of this book. I want one so badly, but I do not have one. I own like 4 copies of the book itself, but none of them are signed, and it's very sad. But anyways, I'm sure you guys have heard of this book. It's just such a beautiful story, and it was really impactful, and I honestly I love it so much, and I think everyone should read this book. Even if you hate it, as long as you read it, I'll be happy. And then my other favorite for the contemporary genre is kind of a mix of contemporary and fantasy. It didn't really fit into the fantasy category, but it doesn't really fit into the contemporary either, but it is one of my all-time favorite books, so I figured I would just slide it in here, and that is The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Lavender by Leslye Walton. So this book is a magical realism, so it does take place in like the real world, but it does have a magical element to it, and the magical element in this book is the fact that the main character is born with wings. This book is just such a incredible and magical, for lack of a better word, story. I loved the writing and I loved everything about this book. It's just so unique and so good. I really, really recommend it, and I just really love this book. The next genre is sci-fi, and you guys know by now that I am not a huge sci-fi fan. I just can't really get into it for some reason. So this one was kind of tricky to pick for. So one of these is a 5-star book and the other one I rated like a 4. Actually, the first one is a 4.5. So none of these are really like my absolute favorite books, but definitely if I had to choose from this genre, it would be these two because I did really, really enjoy them. So the first one is These Broken Stars by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. This is kind of like a Titanic type survival story that takes place in space. It's really, really cool, and I really enjoyed it. I loved the writing and the way that the story was told and just the whole concept of it. I found it really easy to understand too, because sometimes with sci-fis I get really confused because I'm not scientific at all, but I did find this to be really easy to understand for the most part. That is where the 0.5 came off though, because at the end I was completely lost, but I found this to be a really awesome kind of survival love story, and I really enjoyed it. And then the next one is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. This is the first book in the Lunar Chronicles. If you don't know that by now, this is a very, very popular series, and I did really enjoy it. It's not my favorite, like I don't love it as much as everyone else, but I find the concept to be so unique and so cool. It's basically a retelling of Cinderella, but Cinderella is a cyborg, and just the combination of these frilly little fairy tales with kind of the science and the whole idea of robots, which is something that you wouldn't really associate with fairy tales, I think is really cool. And all of the series is fairy tale retellings, and it's all based on that, and it takes place in a completely different world, and there's like a queen from the moon who's really scary. I just really enjoy these books, and I think they're really unique and awesome. The next genre is historical fiction, which is another one of my favorite genres. I really am interested in history, and just combining that with fiction is just, it's like heaven for me. So I definitely have a lot of favorites for this, but I did narrow it down to my top 2, and this genre also has another one of my all-time favorite books, and that is The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. This story is honestly one of the most incredible stories I've ever read. It is so hard for me to describe like how much it touched me and just burrowed deep in my soul. I just adore this book. I think it's such an incredible story, and one that will be around for a very long time. I love the way it's told, the writing, the characters. I honestly just fell in love with this book, and it is so impactful and just so sad and heartbreaking, but it is such an important story, and I really, really recommend it for that reason. It is just so good. You will not regret reading it. And then my next favorite is actually my most recent read out of all the books I'm going to talk about today, and that is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wein, I think it is. People say her last name all different ways, but I read this book for the Booktubeathon last month and I fell in love with it. I listened to the audiobook actually because it is a pretty dense book because there's not much dialogue going on, so it would take a really long time to read kind of page by page, and I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much as I did listening to the audiobook. But I don't want to talk too much about this book because I don't want to give too much away, because I think a lot of the enjoyment in this book is kind of the surprises and figuring stuff out along the way. But it's basically it takes place during World War II, and a British spy plane crashes into Nazi-occupied France. It's told from two perspectives, and it's just such a magical story, and you should read it. It's all about friendship and kind of like dealing with a situation that is dire, but you can't really do anything about it. It's honestly such an incredible story, and it's another one that is so impactful and important, I think. And you get a completely different look at World War II than you usually get in historical fictions that surround World War II, which I really loved, and I like highly recommend this book. It was so good. Like the way it's told, everything about it was just perfect. The next genre is another one of my favorites, and it was very hard to narrow it down because it encompasses so many books, but it is fantasy, and I love fantasy, and it was honestly so hard to narrow this down, but I did manage. I'm not considering Harry Potter. Harry Potter would obviously be my #1 favorite fantasy, but we're just gonna set that aside and assume that and go on to the next one. So this first book probably won't be a surprise at all, neither will the second, but it is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. I said it correctly. I always say Moss and I just can't fix it, so don't yell at me. But this book is so incredible. It's so action-packed. The world is amazing. It's such a character-driven story that makes you fall in love with the characters that you're supposed to fall in love with and hate the characters that you're supposed to hate, but like you hate them so much and you love them so much. It makes you feel emotions so strongly, and you are just pulled into the world of Throne of Glass, and you cannot, like, you're completely captivated by it. It's such a fantastic story. You follow Selena Sardathian, who's an assassin and a badass and just all around queen. Just love her. These books are so fantastic. I love them so much. Yes. This next book probably won't be surprising either because I talk about it a lot, and that is Snow Like Ashes by Sarah Rosh. I adore this book. I think it is so good. So good, and it's not nearly as popular as it should be. It takes place in this world where you have the rhythms and then you have the seasons, so there's kingdoms of winter, autumn, spring, and summer, and winter has been conquered by spring, and Mira is trying to, her and the surviving 8 Wintarians are trying to regain their kingdom and get the magic back and just save all the people because all of their other people are in concentration camps. So they have a lot on their shoulders and they're just trying to save winter, and it is just such a fantastic story. It's filled with royalty, political intrigue, it has magical elements, and it has romance. It has a little bit of everything, and it has a badass lead female, which you can't go wrong with that. I love this book. It's so great. The next genre is paranormal, and I'm not really sure what classifies a book as paranormal. I think it has to do with like ghosts or like mythical creatures. I don't really know, but these books have been classified as paranormal in the past, and I consider them paranormal, so I'm just including them in here. So the first one is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This book was a surprise that I loved it as much as I did. You get to follow Blue and the Raven Boys as they journey to try and find these ley lines and find the mythical Welsh king, and it's just such a ride. It's such an experience. The world of the Raven Boys is just incredible. The writing of this book is incredible. It's so unique, and it's honestly, it's like nothing I've ever read before, and I absolutely adored it. And the next book is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. This is another book that I was not expecting to like. I had no interest in this book when I first heard about it because I am a chicken. I am literally a scaredy cat. I am scared by everything. I'm afraid of the dark. I sleep with lights on. Like, I am the biggest chicken you will ever meet in your life. And this book, when you first look at it, it has all these creepy pictures and it seems like it's gonna be really scary. Like, that is terrifying. I'm terrified of clowns, and that scares me. And there's a bunny. Everything about this book and the pictures in it is creepy. But the story is so like unique and cool, and the fact that it's centered around these pictures and it's built around these pictures is just so cool. I don't understand how he came up with this. It's so out there, but I absolutely adore it. And the last book in this trilogy is coming out this month, and I'm really sad that it's ending, but I'm so excited to read it. I love this series. I love it. The next genre is dystopian, and I used to be really into this genre after the whole Hunger Games fad, that whole thing, and it was huge. And by the way, I'm not considering the Hunger Games for this one, or else this would be #1, so it's kind of the same deal as fantasy. But I don't really enjoy dystopians that much anymore, and that's because I find they're all similar. But anyways, my first favorite dystopian would be Divergent by Veronica Roth, and this isn't the actual book. I have some other book underneath it. I just have the dust jacket because someone's borrowing it, but I read this in grade 12, I believe, and I really enjoyed it. I really just loved the world and the whole concept of it. There were so many twists and turns in the series, some that you enjoy more than others. There were a lot of bold moves made that I really liked, and I just really enjoyed it. I read it a really long time ago, so I don't really remember it that much, and I think I'm gonna give it a reread soon. And the next one is The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. This book I found to be so unique, even though it is a concept that's kind of used a little bit, but I found the way that it was executed to be really unique, and I really enjoyed it. I loved the characters. I loved the whole concept of these kids having powers because they were the survivors. I can't speak today. These survivors of this whole kind of plague thing that was going through the country. I found it to be such a cool story, and to have these kids like running away from all these adults and trying to just survive, I really loved. And I think the series is just so well written too. It's written like very episodically, and I really enjoyed that. It's kind of like reading a movie, which I really liked. And the last kind of genre is classics. Now, this one was very hard because I love so many classics. I'm an English major, it's kind of my job, so I had a really hard time narrowing it down. So what I did was I only took into account kind of modern classics, so anything from like 1800s, 1900s, those, like early 1900s, obviously. So if we were taking into account like Shakespeare and stuff, this would be a whole different story, but I decided to narrow it down. So the first one, these won't come as a surprise either, but it is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. I adore this story. I just love it so much. I think it's so much fun, and it's so like out there and different and cool, and it's honestly one of my favorite books ever, and I could read it so many times. I love it. I love Alice. I love everything about it. It's just so unique and so awesome, and it kind of makes me feel like a kid again, which I really love. And the other one is another children's classic, actually, and that is Anne of Green Gables by Ellen Montgomery. I had to read this for class last year, and I'm so glad that I did because I ended up loving it. I had grown up watching the movie. My mom really loves Anne of Green Gables, and it's a Canadian classic, which, yay, Canada. And it's just such a magical story. This one, again, it makes me feel like a kid because Anne is just so, like, out there, and she can see all the wonder in the world, and it kind of brings you back to that being a kid, having all this imagination and seeing the good in the world rather than the bad as you see in the news all the time. I just really love this book, and I will love it forever. So those are all the books that I wanted to talk about today. Let me know your top 2 books from each of these genres, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!